What happens when the 7-time world champion finds the best pace of the weekend, but ends up eliminated in Q2 and completely out of rhythm in the race? How can anyone go from leading training to fall into irrelevance in just 24 hours? What happened to Hamilton in Azerbaijan 2025 was not just a bad luck. It was a perfect storm of errors, failed technical decisions, and a configuration that betrayed him. But just started on Friday, the fairy tale took a dark turn. In the FP1, Hamilton lost control in one of the most demanding areas of the layout. He hit the barriers with the left front of the car. The damage was not just physical, it was symbolic. His statements after the session said everything: an absolute disaster. The car was uncontrollable in braking, which in Baku is a death sentence. This circuit demands surgical precision every time the brake pedal is stepped, because every error, every doubt, is punished with cement, wall, or gravel. Then something almost cinematographic happened. Between the FP1 and the FP2, Maranello's team made a deep transformation in the car configuration. It was not a simple correction. It was an emergency re-engineering. They adjusted the brakes, reviewed the suspension parameters, and modified the aerodynamic tuning, all in record time. And the result was immediate. In the FP2, Lewis Hamilton not only returned to the track, he swept. He stopped the stopwatch in 1:41.293, a time not only more fast than any other of the day, but even faster than the pole position of the previous year. It was a fact that shook the paddock. This moment felt like a resurrection. For a moment, everyone forgot the FP1's blow. But what nobody knew then was that this rebirth was just an illusion. The problem in Baku was not just strategic. It was, above all, technical, and more specifically, aerodynamic. To understand Hamilton's collapse in the classification of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, you have to go beyond the surface and look in detail the decisions that Ferrari made before the Saturday traffic light went out. Because Hamilton's true enemy was not another pilot. It was the air. Ferrari arrived in Baku with an aerodynamic package specifically designed for this urban circuit. The team brought a new front wing design with external cuts in the final fin, looking for a midpoint between efficiency and grip. But where the game really played was on the rear wing. Ferrari brought two versions, one of medium-low load that they had already tried in Spa, and a second, more radical, with two additional cuts designed to lighten the resistance. On paper, this second version was the brave bet. But that courage soon became fragility. Because while this configuration allowed the car to have more braking stability and passage by curve, the price to be paid was very high in line. And Baku does not forgive in that regard. The main line is one of the longest in the entire calendar, with more than 2 kilometers thoroughly, where the DRS can make a difference of almost a second. Under these conditions, a car with too much aerodynamic load is like running with a backpack full of stones. While Red Bull and McLaren opted for much more aggressive configurations, minimizing resistance to fly in DRS areas, Ferrari did the opposite. And what in Friday's long batches seemed to work when traffic, energy management, and degradation play a more important role, became an anchor on Saturday, when the only thing that matters is to maximize speed in a clean attempt, without distractions. Hamilton found himself trapped in a paradox. He had a car that gave him confidence in curve, but that did not allow him to compete in line. Every time he left a technical curve and the DRS opened, he simply had how to respond to the thrust of his rivals. It was not a power problem. The Ferrari engine was working properly. It was pure drag, pure resistance to advance. It was as if the car was pushing an invisible wall. And this is where the tragedy becomes technical. Because this decision of Ferrari was not an obvious mistake. It was a logical commitment from a certain point of view, but completely disconnected from the real classification environment. What seemed like an advantage in career simulation became a deadly load in attack mode. Ferrari did not correctly calibrate the weight that the peak speed would have in a circuit where the review and the DRS and the traction are decisive. Hamilton had no room. I could not compensate for that lack of talented. I could stop late, trace perfect, go out with a traction. But all that faded when the rivals left him standing on the straight. It was not a fair fight. It was a technical execution. And the worst part is that it was not his fault. It all started in FP2. While Hamilton shed the SF-25 and marked the fastest turn of the day in performance that seemed to point out the Ferrari renaissance, he did it on a compound that should not burn as soon, the middle tires. Meanwhile, his partner Charles Leclerc, in a play of strategic prudence, chose to keep that pneumatic game for future sessions. What seemed a minor difference, a simple variation in batches planning, ended up becoming a structural disadvantage that condemned him in the classification session. Because in Baku, and specifically in this 2025 edition, the average compound turned out to be surprisingly more effective than soft. In fact, the performance difference was estimated at least 0.3 for return to the middle tire, an abysmal margin when fighting to enter Q3. At first glance, that would not seem like a disaster, but it was. Because in that private weekend, the soft tire could not easily enter temperature into the specific conditions of Baku. It took longer to reach the ideal performance window and lost braking stability long before the medium, causing the pilots to compromise their trajectories. It is not that the soft was a slow compound by design. It is that, simply, it did not work with that asphalt at that time of the day and with that car configuration. Leclerc, on the other hand, had the average new compound available and was able to execute its ideal return when I needed it most. Hamilton, no. He had to go out with a tire that was less consistent, less fast and less reliable in the conditions of the moment. And that, in classification, is lethal. There were no driving errors. There were no brake blocks. There was no traffic to harm him. It was simply a poorly calculated strategic choice since Friday, which broke out at the most critical moment. Hamilton was eliminated in Q2. He didn't even have the opportunity to fight for a decent final return. He stared from the garage how times fell and his rivals advanced to Q3 with the correct compound. And the most frustrating thing is that this was avoidable. It was a matter of planning. The Ferrari wall, in its obsession to maximize the FP2 and demonstrate muscle after the debacle in the FP1, prioritized the short term and sacrificed the length. They opted to shine in the free, and that decision left them without real tools for classification. This situation is a reflection of a deeper structural failure. In Ferrari, as so many times it has happened in recent years, the strategic decisions tree seems not to be well coordinated. The management of resources in this case, the available tire games is fragmented between the need to validate the car on the track and the preparation for the time where it really matters, the quali. And in that clash between emergency and vision, Hamilton was the victim. The British pilot, with all his talent, found himself completely tied. He did not have the ideal compound, he did not have the proper aerodynamic load and had no way to compete on equal terms. And the worst part is that I knew it. From cockpit, from technical meetings, from the first push lap in Q2, everything indicated that the margin was non-existent. This was not a tactical error. It was a structure failure, a vision, of internal coordination, one that completely erased the potential that had been shown 24 hours before. Sunday came, and with him, the last redemption opportunity for Hamilton in Baku. A clean output, a brave strategy, or even some chaos on the track could offer you a possibility of comeback. But instead, what was lived was a silent parade of technical impotence. A career in which Hamilton never had a rhythm, never had options, and most alarming of everything, he never had an answer. From the first turn, it was clear that the SF-25 did not have the necessary tools to compete. The excessive aerodynamic load, which had already been an anchor in classification, returned to play against him. In an urban circuit like Baku, where overtaking opportunities depend almost exclusively on the speed in line and the effect of the DRS, Hamilton's car was simply unable to compete melee. Every time the rear wing was opened, the Ferrari seemed to get stuck in a parallel dimension, unable to close the gap or launch a serious attack. What in other teams was a tactical advantage, in Ferrari it became a tool without edge. Hamilton was going around after turning trapped behind slower cars, but with aerodynamically more efficient configurations, which defended themselves without risking. And it was not a matter of talent. Hamilton looked for holes, drew aggressive lines, managed the ERS as an expert veteran. But none of that mattered. The lethal combination of excessive aerodynamic load, erroneous choice of tires, and a strategy that did not react in real time condemned it to anonymity. And to top it off, there were no chaos on track. There were no multiple accidents. There was no red flag. There was no rain that offered a strategic wild card. It was a clean race. Too clean for a pilot who needed disorder to find opportunities. In other conditions, perhaps chaos would have given him the possibility of recovering positions for pure instinct. But that Sunday, Baku did not offer lifeguards. Only surgical precision. And Ferrari was not prepared for that. When the checkered flag fell, Hamilton crossed the line without being the protagonist at any time. No memorable advancement. No quick lap. No battle worthy of replay. Just rounds, helplessness, wear. And so he ended his passage through Baku. Ferrari, meanwhile, must understand that he no longer has time for experiments. He has the most experienced pilot on the grill. It has the most complete competitor. He has a natural leader. He cannot waste it. Each error like Baku is not just a stumbling block in the table. It is a lost opportunity to build something lasting, something that transcends the results of a Sunday and becomes a legacy. And for those we look from the outside, this type of weekends are a brutal reminder that in F1 everything can change in a matter of hours. That Fridays deceive. That simulations lie. That trust is gained curve and lost on a line. And that, even for a 7 times world champion, nothing is guaranteed.